All right. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Talking Nutrition. Today, we're back with another guest. We've been having a lot of guests on lately, and it's been really cool. Today, we are joined by Jenny Blake, nutrition coach who helps ladies who lift, right, to get better results. She really emphasizes the importance of strategy, eating enough, which I love and always talk about. I think it's super important, and we're going to get into that today. Creating autopilot routines, which I also love. I think it's, right, we tend to overcomplicate nutrition, and we don't need to. We can create a system that's repeatable, that's going to keep getting you results. So let's talk about your Create Your Shape program. But first of all, welcome, Jenny. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. What time is it over there in Bali right now? That was a big
It
difference.
is 3 p.m. So we're in the afternoon,
Okay.
which is actually great timing because normally my calls are stateside, which is the opposite of here. So this actually worked out nice.
Cool. 9 a.m. over here. A little bit of a difference. Cool. So let's just start with a little bit of background on you. Like, what got you into fitness? Like, a little bit about your journey, like anything that you maybe struggled with.
Yeah, so I've always been into the fitness side of things. I was a competitive cheerleader, which I don't know if you or your audience is familiar with that, but it's like a combination of a spin-off of gymnastics, we'll say, in the States. And so I've always been super active, and I did that through college and university. And after, I fairly was in shape, or what I say, like looked like I worked out. But I continued my fitness journey afterwards into CrossFit, and I always was wondering, okay, I'm working out a lot. I love working out. Some days I'd be doing 2 a days or 3 a days. And I remember thinking, if I could just add in one extra arm workout, that's what would get my arms defined. And I was just lacking so much knowledge and understanding, and was in the boat of like, oh, I just need to do more, more, more. And then I learned, it's nutrition that I'm missing. I just need to eat less, less, less. So I'm going to get on my fitness pal that told me to eat 1,200 calories. And I did that for 3 days and was starving. And it was like, oh my gosh, either I don't have enough willpower or this just is wrong. And I feel like the ladies that I work with, very go-getter, type A, lifting weights. So I refer, a lot of my examples and what I'm always thinking about is them. But we don't lack willpower, right? That's not something that we may think we do because we can't stick to 1,200 calories because we're starving, but we don't lack willpower. And so I was like, there's got to be something that I'm missing. And I ended up signing up for a bodybuilding show because I was like, okay, they know how to create their shapes, right? They know how to mold their shapes. They know the tools, and that's got to be what I'm missing. Something that they're doing is what I'm missing. And there wasn't a program like I offer now out there. So I was searching for more of a program because I was like, I don't know if I want to do a show. But then I was like, all right, I want to learn it all. Let's just go hire all the coaches and figure it out. And then once I had learned that the missing component was having a strategy, right? That a nutrition strategy is now what I call it, but having a strategy where part of that strategy is eating enough, and it's aligning your nutrition and your training, and it is having different time periods where you're emphasizing different things. And it's not about how like healthy you can eat, but more about specific quantities. Again, all wrapped into this like concrete strategy where I saw, the biggest changes I'd seen in my physique and achieved what I was going after by also doing so much more like less work, right? And so once I did that, I became like, oh my gosh, this is what I was missing. And also there are millions of ladies who were just like me, who maybe don't want to do a show to figure this out, but need somebody who's kind of in between to simplify this, break this down, explain it to them so they understand it, but also help them execute it to look like they work out because they are putting in the work. So that was a long story, but that's pretty much my journey and my what I kind of experience and what a lot of my ladies experience with nutrition and training.
Cool. Yeah, you brought up a really good point, like already, right? And doing less and how that can be a better thing to do sometimes. And it's funny too, because I also come from like a CrossFit background. Definitely had like similar, moments where I was like, hey, I'm doing 6 workouts a week, but what if I do double and then, you know, and then
Oh yeah, I
the
was the
arm
girl at the
workout
end
and
of
like,
class being like, "Who wants to do extra abs? Who wants to do
yeah.
this extra wad?" Yeah, for
And
sure.
then you do the typical, like you grab the whiteboard and you just throw a bunch of shit at it, And it's
Yes.
like, hey, this is my like after class workout, Um, which like I have a lot to thank the CrossFit, so but I like to joke
Oh,
about it too
same.
because I
100%.
feel
Yeah.
I feel like we or anyone who gets into it kind of goes through that and learns a hard lesson at some point, or most people will. And you're so right because there's so much emphasis on just the training side of things, and of course that's the fun stuff, and that's of course like what you're there for. But then if there's not enough nutritional education and people just kind of are left to their own devices and need to figure it out on their own, which I mean, as well, like to figure that out on your own is difficult, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, we're never taught
People don't.
this. I don't
No,
I don't know how it
exactly.
is in Norway, but in the States we're definitely not taught nutrition. Maybe in the 5th grade you're learning the food pyramid. That's
The
very
pyramid, yeah,
outdated, but besides that, we learn more about computers than we do our own bodies. It's crazy.
yeah, yeah, and like, so I'm from Holland, where we also didn't really learn that, and then I moved to Norway. Same kind of thing here. It's like because I always heard like Norway is like this. They have like the best health system and all that, but still like obesity is also an issue here, and like health in general is also not like that great, like the way it's set up and education and all that. No, but doing less and then actually achieving the body that you want to create, like that's such a big lesson for people to learn. And it's not like the extra workout. It's not like, hey, I need to do more cardio. It's like, hey, maybe do a little bit less and actually be smart about your food and create that strategy. So that got you into kind of like figuring it out. When did you start coaching? And what kind of like led you to that moment?
Yeah, so it was a combination of was starting to do bikini shows and really learning and applying the nutrition for myself. And at the same time, I was in corporate finance back in the day. And my friend, who was a nutrition coach and she's an elite CrossFit competitor, but she was building her business, and she's like, hey, I really need help. I need help from the business side of things because that just wasn't her forte. And with my finance and Excel skills and organization skills, she was like, I really need your help. And also, you get macros, you get, CrossFit, you get bikini competitions. Like, you are also would be a great fit. Would you mind helping me out? So I'd always had an interest in this like fitness nutrition field. But then I started helping with her, and then first was on the business side, but then got brought over to seeing how she worked with her clients, and then me starting to help her clients some. And then at the same time, I was doing bikini shows and like figuring out the strategy more and more. And that's when I was like, I want to learn this more for myself too. And then went down the path to get my license and study and pass my boards. And then people just started noticing, right? I've always been active on social media. So I have had people reach out from kind of different walks of life being like, oh, hey, I see you're doing this. Can you help me do this? And then I felt confident because I'd seen how it works. I got my license. Like I had experience in myself and started taking on clients. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And then first I started with, coaching everyone. And then I quickly realized, who I work best with, who I like to work best, or who I like to work with, and kind of really niche down so I could focus on just one type of clientele and then create a whole program specifically for that person.
Cool. Because you only work with women, right?
Yeah, I only work with ladies who are lifting weights.
Cool. Love that.
Yep.
Awesome. Were you doing one-on-one before? Or did you kind of like start with the group, or like how did that kind of like?
Yeah, I was doing one-on-one, and so kind of same thing. At first I niched down to just ladies, and I was still doing one-on-one. And then I realized based on, who I was attracting, they were more and more the same person, of course, with different goals, different custom macros. But as far as the education was the same, they needed to learn the strategy. They needed to learn to eat enough. And so I was saying a lot of the things over and over again, and then taking that information and then applying it. And I have different, weekly planning system that I teach. I have, nutrition vacation strategy that I teach. I have all these different components to actually apply it into your lifestyle. And so I found myself partly repeating myself, but then, this client over here, she didn't get this information, but this person did. She didn't get this information because, it was one-on-one. So it was just whatever the one person was running into. So after doing enough of that, I was like, I think there's a better way where I can group all of this information together really intentionally, almost like a course that I guide them through, but at the same time, them have their own like one-on-one custom macros and strategy. So now it's kind of like a combination where everything's done in a cohort style, but at the same time, their macros are custom to them. So it's kind of like a group one-on-one combination.
Love that. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I think the education is so important. And you brought up a good point where people run into the same issues. And if you have like a system, even for yourself, to like teach them and walk them through that, hey, maybe you're not struggling with like eating out yet, or maybe it's just not something that you do that often. Hey, who knows? Maybe like half a year down the road, like you will run into that same issue, like, so either way, it's good to touch on that stuff and learn. What would you say
exactly.
is, let's start on like the food side of things, kind of like the changes you make, and mostly just kind of like what you see your ladies struggle with, or maybe like the mistakes they made in the past, because you brought up your 1,200 calories already with my fitness pal, which I went through as well. First time I want to lose weight. What would you say are the most common issues that most ladies deal with before they sign up?
Yeah, I would say they are not eating enough is the number one thing, like 99% of my ladies. And so they go into, and it could be ladies who are like, they're already tracking macros, right? And they're like, okay, I'm sticking with 1,400 calories. Or because they've done diets before, that they're just used to the habit and the routine of eating less, maybe all week. And then one night when they go out to eat, they overeat or over consume, or it's kind of like fluctuating all over the place, or maybe a little bit of yo-yoing where they're either all or nothing. And then I would say also because they are like the go-getter, career-driven person, they maybe are like back to back in meetings, and then they're like, oh, okay, I'll just eat later, or I'll just grab this snack here. And then by the time they get home, they're starving, and then think like, oh my gosh, I need to have more willpower to not eat, something that's just readily available. And I need to have make my meal. And then they, over consume because they've under consumed all day. So I'd say that's definitely a big factor. And then not having a strategy. So they are just thinking like, oh, I just need a diet all the time. Or they go into a diet, but they don't prime their bodies beforehand. And so the diet isn't very effective, or they don't understand what the diet actually means. So they may be like, oh, I'm just going to eat clean, but then get frustrated when it works for a couple of days, then doesn't work. And then they're kind of confused.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's when you end up like not looking like you work out, still going very hard at the gym and not seeing the results,
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, I want to have the muscle gain, but also the fat loss. And actually I want to PR my workout, and I want to eat clean and healthy. And like, I also want to do the weekends, like, like you're trying to do everything all at once. And it makes sense because if you don't know, we tend to think like, okay, well, I just need to do this one eating healthy thing, and then I will get all of that, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, especially at this level, right? Because you can, for what I say, like the average American, right? And maybe a lot of average people who are very overweight, you could just eat healthier, right? You move more. And that's great advice for you. But for people like my ladies who are already lifting, who are already conscious of their nutrition, they need a more fine-tuned plan to get more fine-tuned results. And that's what they're after. They want to look like they work out. They want to have the curve, the lines, the definition. And that is just a different level of knowledge and application that they have just never been taught before.
Yeah, 100%. So let's actually start there, because you mentioned your strategy, priming the body. Take us through that. So someone comes to you, right? They've tried all these different diets. They eat 12, 1400 calories, whatever. Like initially, like what do you kind of do on the food side of things to kind of like prime them to actually go maybe into a fat loss phase or muscle gain?
Yeah. So the first step in the nutrition strategy is to eat enough. So that'll be the first thing we actually implement. And it depends, eat enough. What does that mean, right? It's going to depend on your body, right, and what you need. And so, of course, I collect a lot of information to determine that. And then we slowly work our way up to that. And that's, again, depends on the individual, but typically they're eager to get into the deficit phase. So I think around 2.5 months is a good spot to slowly work your way up. I think longer if you can do it, right? But I know a lot of my ladies are like, okay, I'm ready for to go into the diet phase. So that's step one, eat enough. And you do that with, the custom macros. So I know, okay, I need 130 grams of protein. I need X amount of carbs, X amount of fat. And so from there, step two is aligning your training. And so you can kind of do this at the same time, but optimizing your workouts. Most of my ladies are already lifting in some capacity, but are they on a progressive overload training program? A lot of them are too, but that's something on the checklist that we want to make sure. And then the second thing is understanding how it actually works. So again, so many are like, I just need to work out more and more and more, where we don't want to work out more and more. We just want you to have more intensity in that hour workout you're already doing. And what does that intensity look like? Well, tracking your weights, going close to failure, like emphasizing mind muscle connection. So you're focused on that specific muscle in that exercise. So going fine tuning and optimizing their training to actually build muscle and change the body composition and shape. So those are the two big things, or the two first steps and the two big things. Of course, there's lots of micro things within that we discuss and tweak and that, but those are the two big things before going into the calorie deficit, which that would be then step 3 in the nutrition strategy, entering into a calorie deficit phase.
Cool. I want to repeat 2 words that you mentioned. What is it? Actually, more than 2, but anyway. You said 2.5 months before dieting. And that's something I think is very important, because that's 2.5 months of doing the pre-work, like getting you ready to actually go into that. This is important for people, I think, if you're considering coaching, right? If you want to lose the body fat, or if you want to look toned or jacked or whatever you want to call it, like there's a little bit of pre-work you want to do if you want to get good results, if you want to look like you work out, if you want to be in a better spot as you go into that deficit. And this is why you shouldn't just jump into another cut after trying 100 different diets. It's like, hey, like let's do this first. Because when was the last time you ate enough? When did you for the last time spend 2+ months actually fueling your body, like nourishing the body? Like it's so important. And I think if you skip that, your results are definitely going to be not as good as what it could be,
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think too, that is the time where you learn the skill of the application, right? So you have more flexibility in that time. And so it's the time to create that nutrition routine, like we talked about earlier, creating a routine that runs on autopilot. So that way you learn that skill, you create your system while you're eating more, while you're building muscle. And then when you go into the deficit phase, it's a lot easier because you already have that system in place. You're just kind of sharpening it. But then after the calorie deficit phase, then you have the skills to maintain it because you've created that nutrition routine up front. So I think that's an important part that many don't think about or don't do because they just want to skip all that and go into the diet right away.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people don't know about it because it's just not utilized that much. You know,
Yeah.
like there's very few. I mean, definitely Norway, but I think internationally, very few people who still, right, relatively speaking, like who do it that way, who actually say, hey, you know what, you want to diet? Cool. We're not going to diet. We're going to have you eating enough first. We're going to build the habits, like create the systems and teach you the skills. It's so key. And that's why people keep spinning their wheels. And that's why we need more programs like yours, for example, right? To help people. And I think that's great. So what then happens when you go into the next phase, that calorie deficit? Like what kind of like changes do you make there? What kind of stuff do you emphasize?
Yeah. And before we get into that phase, I am assuming some of the listeners are thinking, yeah, but if I eat more, I'm going to gain body fat. So you're telling me I've got to gain body fat for 2.5 months, or I'm going to look, I'm not going to make progress. I'm going to feel bad about myself for 2.5 months more. And that's not what I'm saying. I would say most of my ladies look better and improve their body composition in those 2.5 months for two reasons. I won't get into all of it, but for two main reasons. The first is they're building muscle. So now they actually have enough nutrients to build muscle. And when people say they want to get lean, they want to get toned, right? They want muscle, but they just want to have decreased body fat so they can see that. And that's how you look like you work out. So a lot of times I see my ladies' photos, everything looks lifted, right? Where it's like the glutes look perkier, the back looks tighter, like everything's just lifted because they've gained more muscle. So that's the first reason that they actually look better. The second reason, too, is we do it at a very slow rate. I'm not saying for people to just jump up to eating, 2,400 calories. You're going to start where you are, and slowly over time, you're adjusting and increasing. But you're doing it at the pace of your body and your metabolism, right? So you'll slowly increase. And you're not just getting a ton of new calories and gaining body fat. So I would say most of the time I see my ladies' physiques improve during that first phase. And also they're priming themselves for the next phase. They're learning the lifestyle skills and routine. They have more flexibility because they're just eating more food. So they're like, oh, I don't feel bad now when I go out to eat, or when I actually need these, this rice, I need these potatoes, and things like that. So just wanted to preface that because I know somebody's thinking it.
Yeah.
And then anything you wanted to add on to that before I actually
because this like reminded me of a point that you brought up in the beginning. This then also keeps you from binging over the weekend, overeating at times. That's often also why people think, right, they're eating way more calories, but sometimes you actually end up eating a little bit less, or at least it's just more controlled. And not doing those weekend binges, that's going to be a huge difference too. So I did actually want to bring that up because that's something that you'll see disappear as well. And things like cravings and just, consistently like falling off after like a good week, like you actually have the time to build those healthy routines. And the weekends, like that's a big one that you want to cover before a deficit.
Yeah, totally. And you nailed it. When you're eating more consistently, you're not going to have those cravings. You're not going to feel like you have to like willpower your way through an outing and be like, no, don't eat that, because you will actually feel full and satisfied. And I know you commented on, I put out a reel about eating bigger meals. And I know and I had a podcast on it. I know you commented on that. So I think it's really a simple way of saying eat enough. But that's the biggest thing I see, because ladies will have these little tiny meals and then they'll be like, I can't stop snacking. I'm like, well, you're not eating enough in your meal. Or like, oh, I can't hit my macros. And it's like, well, you just need a bigger portion in your meal and then you would hit it. So it's like a mindset switch to, instead of thinking about, am I vaguely eating enough? Am I eating? Am I adhering to my plan? Am I staying on track? But more so making a decision with every meal if I'm making progress or not. And when it comes to eating enough, it really is coming down to each meal needs to be big enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that one. It's the same here, you know, like people think like a healthy breakfast is like one little cracker with like tiny bit of chicken or something, you know, a little bit of jam.
Yeah.
And like that's it. And then you don't eat until like, 5 or whatever. Like, no. Let's actually eat like actual meals.
Yeah. Yep. So then, so we got a little sidetracked. Sorry. Step
No,
three
that's
is
okay.
going into that calorie deficit phase, and you said, what does that look like? So now that you've primed your body and your physique to go into that phase, you're eating enough. So most ladies that I work with who are lifting weights are burning 2,000 calories per day or more. And I know a lot of people are thinking like, oh, well, I don't like lift super heavy, or I'm not an elite athlete. I'm not talking about elite athletes. I'm talking about someone who, if you're going to CrossFit, 4 days a week, if you're going to the gym and some dumbbells in your hand, 4 or 5 days a week, like that, I'm talking to you too. So once you're eating enough, let's say, a lot of my ladies get up to, let's say 2,200 calories, then they can go into the calorie deficit phase at 1,700 calories or 1,800 calories. And that is still a lot of food. So when you go into the calorie deficit phase at 1,800 calories, you don't become hangry all of the time where you're just thinking about food and thinking, again, going back to that, oh, I just have to have willpower to get through, because you still feel satisfied with your meals. You're actually getting enough nutrients in. One big thing that I also notice is that they still can push in their workouts, because again, they're getting enough food in, so they don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm like, just don't have any more gas in the tank, because they're still getting a decent amount of food in. Again, the cravings, things like that don't appear maybe late in the diet. Like that stuff some of this stuff may happen. But again, being at such a higher intake, supporting your hormones too, supporting your metabolism. So it really just sets you up, like the priming phase sets you up for success in the deficit phase, to decrease body fat during that time, but also sustain it afterwards. So that way your body afterwards, after the deficit phase is over, isn't like, okay, I need all the food right now, and then you rebound and gain it back. So it sets you up for that too. So the biggest difference is going to be the calorie decrease in the deficit phase, mostly through carbs and fats. I would say mostly through fats and then carbs as well. And then you just have to be more accurate, because in the lifestyle phase, that's the first two steps, you do have more flexibility. But in the deficit phase, it does become that math problem. And it's something that you can, again, look at every meal and being like, does this meal, if I take my total calories macros for the day, divide it by how many meals I'm having per day, is this meal going to allow me to hit my targets or not? And then one last thing, people think like, oh, if I eat less, it's okay. But I really don't encourage that. Like, your targets are your targets for a reason, because you want to eat as much as you can while still creating that deficit to decrease body fat. So you don't want to just be like, okay, well, I'll just eat less and then things will move faster. Like, the macros are intentional, so that way you're decreasing body fat and not just decreasing muscle.
Yeah. And that's why you got to do that pre-work too. I think when you actually invest that time in learning macros and how to stick to it and creating a system, like, then you don't have to mess around during the cut either. Like, it's already dialed in. Like, you're good. You can just execute. And I mean, just execute. Like, let's be honest, like, dieting is also not always fun. And, we
Yeah.
have our moments, and it's not necessarily like easy, but we set ourselves up for much better results and more success by doing that. And again, like, you don't just want to just cut aggressively, like you said, the 1,200 calories. My fitness well, like, by the way, like, don't follow an app's recommendations, like whatever app, like
Yes.
even like Chronometer that we use, like, I'm always like, hey, cool, like, we're going to set this for you and I'm going to show you why and how, whatever, because you can't just base it off whatever calculation. I don't care like which calculation it is. There's some pretty good ones and that we also use, but it's like, hey, we still need to actually like figure that out. And we need to be in
Yeah,
charge
you
of your
need the
targets and not
biofeedback.
just an app. Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay, cool. What about the keeping it off part? That's not like, that's a risky moment, right? Like the thing where most people kind of go wrong, generally speaking.
What? Sorry, I didn't hear that part. What was it?
The keeping it off part.
Oh, the keeping it off part. Yeah. So are you asking, just my approach or my thoughts
Yeah.
on how?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
what happens after the diet?
So I think the way you worded that question, what happens after the diet, is the biggest thing, because many people don't ever see the end to the diet, and then that's what gets them in trouble into not keeping it off. So they just stay at that diet calorie intake, like even the 1700, right? They'll just stay there, and then over time a handful of things happen. Adherence slips, and so then they're eating more, then eating less, eating more and eating less, and then their metabolism is suppressed. So then they're just in a position where they can more easily gain that body fat. And then especially for my ladies, it's suppressing their hormones. So it's just putting them in an unfavorable position to store body fat. So the first thing is stopping the diet. Like, the diet should be a short, dedicated period of time, like established ahead of time of, okay, this is when I'm starting. It's going to be 8 or 10 or 12 weeks. I would say that's typically what I see. And what I encourage my ladies, because that's typically what they can adhere to and then not risk suppressing hormones and metabolism. But it's a dedicated period of time. And then after that, I say the nutrition strategy is repeatable. You just repeat the nutrition strategy, where then you're back at that starting point where you slowly increase your intake and work your way back up to how many calories you're burning per day. So I think those are the two biggest factors to keeping it off, from like a scientific perspective. But then going back to the actual creating that routine of how you're applying it and how your system works in the day to day is how you're also going to maintain it versus, oh, I'm on versus I'm off the diet. And lastly, I would say this is something that I feel like is not discussed a lot in the nutrition world and the fitness world, but I'm bringing it to it, is estimating macros. I think so many are thinking, well, it's not going to be accurate. And which I agree, it's not going to be accurate. It's not the only way to do things, but I think it is crucial for people to know how to estimate macros, because you are not going to be with the food scale in your app your entire life. And I think that when you should be able to make the decisions from your brain and not make the decisions based on what an app's telling you, because you're going to get busy. You're going to not want to track macros at some point in your life. You're going to want to go on vacation. You're going to get caught up at work and have like 2 seconds to make a decision, and being able to use your brain to do that versus having like, hold on, I have to rely on this app, is so crucial, especially after the diet phase and maintaining it for the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's when you can like, step away from tracking, but also practice. Like that's another skill that we got to learn,
Yes.
It's like, okay, cool. Like we use the macros and we use the app and yes, we track. It's, that's how we get best results, through tracking. But then again, like you said, you're not going to do it forever. So it's so important to also learn how to do without tracking.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's
And it
not,
almost is,
talked about enough.
yeah, and it almost is, you are tracking, right? Because you're just learning how to guesstimate. You're not relying on something else to do it for you. You're like teaching your brain how to do it in a split second, and you don't have to memorize every single food. There's categories to foods, and there's, ways you can structure your day to make it a lot simpler than most think.
For sure. And whether we want to call this like intuitive eating or not, like that whole movement, right? I don't agree with it necessarily. I like the idea, Of course, I think it's great when people can eat healthy and maintain the results like without tracking. But to get to that point, like, is it still kind of like really intuitive, or are we proactively like learning and we're still making like decisions based on like the stuff that we've learned, you know, like at some point, like it is going to be pretty much, okay, I kind of know what to do. But to get to that point, like it does take work, you know?
Yes, that's a great point because I think so many people see the people who are like, oh, I don't track, I just eat intuitively. But then you learn their story and it's like they tracked for, 7 years. So, and they ate enough, for years before that. So what their body's craving is what they've always done, which is still tracking. Like they're still hitting targets. They're just maybe they don't have to like use an app to do that. So I think you've like nailed it with our it's not intuitive, right? We proactively create our body to be intuitive, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Like it's like we need to like earn the right to kind of like know how to do that.
Yes. And you
Which
said
going
it
back to,
perfectly. It's a skill.
yeah.
It's a skill that you just learn.
And it's not a skill that you just learn by just not tracking like day one after your diet. You know,
Yes.
it's not like, hey, I'm done. I'm good. I'm going to be eat intuitively. Like, no, we need to get like to that point, and it takes a bit of time for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I think because I'm kind of like thinking in terms of like questions I'm asked, and I see with people who start, you know, with us. One that comes up a lot, and I feel like especially with women, is the experience of, hey, the doing cardio for fat loss. You know, doing. I mean, we touch on like weightlifting already, but like, what are your thoughts there? General kind of like mistakes you see people make in the past, maybe like before starting with you, like with the cardio stuff, and then how do you still implement some cardio throughout that program?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually interviewed one of my clients and I had forgotten about this, but she said, I remember my first call with you and I was telling you how I was running every day and I tried to get in like 1 to 3 miles every day in addition to my lifts. And you told me like, well, do you enjoy running? And I said, no, I absolutely hate it. And I was like, okay, well, you can stop doing that. It's not going to impact your shape. And of course, with everything that we implemented, her shape is much better now, and she doesn't run at all because it's just unnecessary. So, yeah, I see so many ladies who think, oh, I need to add on more cardio. I just need cardio is what I'm missing. And they just don't understand again how it works, that it's just essentially a formula of, calories in, calories out, but they're like, I need to eat clean, I need to run more, I need to work out more. So once they learn the formula, they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. But then they learn the strategy of, okay, I need to first eat enough. And if I'm constantly adding on more calories and burning more calories, then I'm just like chasing a moving target because I'm trying to eat enough, but I keep burning more and more. So typically the first 2.5 months, when we're in that first phase of the nutrition strategy, when we're focused on eating enough and we're focused on aligning your training, that is the time where I may be reducing cardio from my ladies who are the 2-a-days who are like, oh, I need to add on more and more. So it's typically when I'm reducing cardio for some, or they're just sticking with their program, and some of it, with some progressive overload programs, they may have some cardio in there. I am not anti-cardio. I think it's great for overall health, but for the purpose of building your shape, which is what my ladies want to do, I think you don't have to have it in there. So a lot of them too don't have a lot of time because they have careers and other things going on, and so we really focus on using your training for building muscle and then your nutrition for managing your body fat. So the first phase, typically not included, or for some of my ladies, I'm removing it. Then for the second phase, or that step 3 of the nutrition strategy of entering to the calorie deficit phase, first, I don't add it in because, again, I just want to move one item, which is bringing your calories and macros down, and let that do the work for you. Keep your training the same. We don't need to add more time onto your week. We're just going to reduce the calories to manage your body fat. And typically from there, maybe at a week 4, maybe week 6, depending on the lady, depending on the situation, depending on the amount of time she has in her goals, I may add some in. It really just depends there, but we're really focused on using nutrition to decrease body fat, and then cardio can be added in as a tool if needed for certain people.
Cool. Love that. Yeah. That's a big one too, because we still see like the fat burning workouts online and stuff. And it's something that just doesn't seem to go away. It's, especially with like the zone 2 cardio and all that. I actually got a question about this yesterday. It's like, oh, so I heard like doing a certain amount of cardio is better for fat burning. Yeah, like sometimes you're burning fat and sometimes you're burning sugar, but it's not fat loss that we're talking about. That's something people also don't know. Cool. Let's see. Because, okay, we touched on a lot of good stuff, the strategy, right? The nutrition, the tracking. One thing a lot of people struggle with are like the more flexible moments, the flexible foods, the weekends, evenings out. Like how flexible, like, will you have people go? And what are kind of like some guidelines there?
Yeah, so typically, again, going back to these phases, in the lifestyle phase, when you do have more flexibility, I suggest keeping it in the 0 to 4 drinks per week on average, alcoholic drinks. And then, some weekends you're going to a wedding and you might have a little more than that. Some other weekends you're chilling and you are maybe having none, right? So it's not so like precise, but on average. And then as far as going out to eat, I suggest keeping it within that like 0 to 2, like dining out, and then 0 to 2, what I call like your go-to restaurants. So I don't know if you've heard of Chipotle, but it's an awesome option, and where it's your rice, your grilled chicken, your vegetables, that I consider a go-to restaurant where it's almost replacing your meal prep, and it's something that it's quick, convenient, easy, macro friendly, where having 2 to 3 go-to restaurants like that, I think it's going to be part of your nutrition routine anyway, that you're going to need because you're going to be out and about. You're going to travel sometimes. You're going to have to run errands, where having that option is like really important to stay consistent. But again, making them delicious so that way you enjoy it. So in total, 0 to 4, but I would say trying to have most of those be those directional places. And then maybe you have date night once a week. Maybe you have girls' night. Maybe you have a group dinner out. Maybe like, 1 or 2 times a week that you're going out to nicer places or that aren't as, on plan.
Cool.
But that's during the lifestyle phase. During the calorie deficit phase, it's a different story. Again, it's like, I wish I could bend science, but it just doesn't work that way. You have to be more accurate. And so during that phase, I suggest my ladies use that as a time to go alcohol free, and also use it as a time to limit and not go out to eat. Maybe they use those 2 to go to restaurants as they're going out to eat. But for some, depending on where they're at in their life, it's just not something that fits with them. And in that case, I recommend 6 drinks total during the deficit phase, and then sticking to 1 time per week going out to eat, but still being very conscious of those targets.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's yes, flexibility is key, and we want to be, able to include some, evenings out, some drinks here and there, whatever it is. But it's like when you're in a deficit, like let's make this count. It's gonna be like just a period of time, like
yes,
sure, it's not always fun, but can we make a little bit of a trade-off for like 12 weeks or whatever, and then just give you that back so that it's easier, more effective, you get better results, right? It's a trade-off that's definitely worth making.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's a short, dedicated period of time. And I feel like what people, they just think like, oh my gosh, it's going to be awful. And I get it. I've been there before. I've, had to do an extreme gut protocol for a very long time. And the social aspect, I'm very social. So I am someone who very much so gets it, but I will say it really opened up my eyes. And a lot of my ladies say this too, that, oh my gosh, there's so much life outside of drinking and going out to eat. And like, oh my gosh, I do other hobbies. I'm meeting new people who are into the fitness world, and it really opens up your world, and you just feel so much better. So I'm not saying I'm against eating out. I love to eat out too. But again, when it comes down to what's my goal right now during this time frame, let's focus on that. And then afterwards, there'll be plenty of time for that. And again, you may, depending on how you're progressing, you may have room to go out to eat, or you may not. It all depends on how you're progressing too. If you're not progressing, I'm like, well, what's going on here? Let's dig into it. You need to cut back on going out to eat. If you are doing great and you understand nutrition because you learned so much during the first phase, and you're going out to eat and you're still making progress, great, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like getting clear on priorities and just making sure that, what we do just kind of like aligns with your phase. And we're not trying to do too much at once. It kind of goes back to, what I said in the beginning. It's like, hey, we want to have the muscle gain and the fat loss and this and that. It's kind of similar. It's like, hey, we want to have the fat loss, but also still go out for food, still drink. And, it's stuff that doesn't necessarily like add up.
Yeah, I find that too in different, like when you're in a certain phase where if you leave your brain to its own devices and you forget about the strategy for a second, and you have, one weekend during your building phase where you go out to eat, and so the next morning you're feeling a little bit fluffy, your brain's going to go, I need to go into a deficit, I need to go into the diet, and now my goals change, and now I want to decrease body fat. And then you focus on that for a week, and then the next week at the gym someone hits a PR and you want to match that PR or beat them, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I want to build, and then you focus on build. So like you gotta catch the brain, because if not, it'll like kind of want to have 5 different goals at once, and not knowing that all these take time. And you always have to go back to, okay, what phase of the nutrition strategy am I in? That's going to impact like my decisions and my expectations of myself and my physique.
Love that. Awesome. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Long-term strategy, long-term plan, something that just gets you the results, but also allows you to be flexible from time to time, and that also just fits into your life. Where, hey, I'm not going to be dieting during Christmas or, midsummer. Like, hey, on my vacation, I'm probably not going to be like reverse dieting or something. Like it's so important to have that in place.
Yeah, so you're spot on, and that's why I actually start a group in October every year, because it's the perfect timing with those 2.5 months where you do have more flexibility, where you are focused on eating enough, where you are focused on, training hard. It's a perfect time to have holidays and actually like make use of the winter and all of the foods that come along with it, and then make progress and build muscle, prime your body. And then you go into the new year where typically people are like ready for that deficit or diet phase. It kind of sets you up nicely for that.
For sure. Yeah. And I like that. It's a good periodization. It's like, let's build those habits, eat enough, use the food, and then let's get into it. Like when you're ready, the timing is perfect, literally. Oh, that's cool. So that being said, like you have a new cohort coming up pretty soon, right?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, today is the first day of open enrollment. I think this will come out on Monday, and the final day to apply is September 17th, and then we get started in mid to late October.
Awesome. Yeah. This episode launches on the 11th of September, so you'll still have a full week to sign up and check that out. Cool.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on? Or do you feel like, we touched on pretty much the most important stuff?
I would say the only thing that we didn't talk about that I am big on is blood work. So I do have my ladies optional, but I suggest them get a full blood work panel done. And kind of going back to, we talked about like calories in versus calories out, right? But we talked about priming the body. And I almost think as blood work as taking a look underneath, the hood of a car to see, are all of the systems operating optimally? So that way, calories in, calories out is operating optimally. Not so. Yes, I do it to focus on how can we get them in the best shape to build muscle and decrease body fat, but also for energy levels, overall health, vitality, cycle symptoms, like all of these other things in their life that, when are improved, mean a lot, maybe even as much as how they look. So that is something also that I'm really big on and that I include in the program.
Love that. And that's cool. And that's also not something you'll see a lot, I think, generally speaking, like in the space. Luckily more now. But I mean, as well, how common is it to have, to see people with gut issues, with hormonal issues, cycle loss, menstrual cycle just being completely like all over the place. Also for dudes, like, low sex drive, like all these kind of things, like, hey, these are signs that something's up. Let's actually look at the blood work, see what we can do about it, see what we can figure out. And of course, like, we're not doctors, but we can help people on the diet and lifestyle side of things. And that's something I think we almost forget, generally speaking. It's like, no, I have my doctor to go to and those kind of things. And you get the blood work, you get the medicine, whatever. Not like, no, if you lift your weights and you eat healthy and you address your lifestyle, there's so much you can do.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had my own experience with gut health in hormone imbalances, which then led me down the functional path in to get my functional medicine, like nutritionist certification, because, I had my own experience, but then I was seeing things in my clients, and I kept learning more and more and more, which led me down that path. So to be able to get that done, to be able to help them more, because you're right. So many people need help, and there's such a separation between Western medicine of, oh, okay, you don't have a disease, you're not dying, you're fine, versus people who are like, I work out, I take care of myself, I don't feel great, or I'm, having issues, and I don't want to just be alive, I want to thrive. How can I get there? And I think that's the difference really between what maybe a Western doctor would look at versus what we as nutritionists and functional medicine nutritionists are really focused on.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. It's totally random question, totally unrelated. You saved a couple of cats, right, in Bali?
Yes.
How are they doing? I just had to ask. Like,
oh, I'm so happy you asked. Yes. So I have had a lifelong dream of having cats, and of course, we were going to wait until we were more settled. But we're going to be in Bali for at least another year, and so I fostered kittens, and I was like, okay, I have to have them, and so I got 2 cats, which turned to be way more work than I could have ever imagined. They have, a deadly disease, and then with that, a suppressed immune system. And ironically, we know we're just talking about blood work. They got blood work done, and it was very cool to be able to get their blood work. And obviously, cats are slightly different, but to be able to understand what I was seeing in the blood work, so that was very awesome. But and so they have been suppressed immune system, so they've been sick and had every week something new. However, they are slowly getting better, minor sicknesses, and then last week they went into heat, which I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but essentially it's when female cats are able to get pregnant, and so they try to attract males. So they are sticking their booties up in the air and wiggling and screaming and hooting and hollering. And so I actually had to put the other cat in the other room because she was being so loud that she would absolutely disturb this podcast. So, it's been one thing after another, but they are wonderful. Thank you for asking.
Good to hear. I just, because I've been following you on Instagram, I'm like, I got to know. We have 2 cats over here too. And
I was going to ask. Only a cat person would ask me about that. So, what, you have 2 cats too?
Yeah, 2. I'll say I'm originally a dog person. Always had dogs for 30 plus years. Then I moved to Norway, no dogs in the house anymore. And we live together now, my girlfriend and I. And she's actually allergic. We want to have a dog. At some point, we might get one,
Yeah.
or two. We'll know. We'll see. But for now, we have two cats, and they're great. She's definitely a cat person. I kind of like turn into a cat person too. So.
Yeah, Aaron's doing the same. Every time he comes home, he like looks for them, and
Yeah,
it's cute. Oh, that's exciting. Awesome.
they're great. Cool. Still doing the ice baths as well. That's my
Yeah.
last question
So
for today. I'll let you go.
yes, we could talk forever. Yeah, I love the ice baths, and of course, there's so many here, and it's hot here, so it's a little probably easier to do here. But if for some reason I have early meetings or something like that, I actually have an ice bucket in my freezer that I just pull out and then fill up with water to get as cold as I can. And then I just dunk my face and hands in. So that's been a good alternative. I'm trying not to do the full ice bath as much because I know it will limit my gains to some degree, but it's kind of hard when it makes you feel so amazing mentally. So I still try to do it a couple times a week though.
Yeah, because that's for you been a big thing, right? Like doing those ice baths and now feeling like way better.
Yes. Yeah. So as we were talking about, like with my gut issues, which led to hormonal issues and neurotransmitter issues, like it just really impacted my mental health. And when I say mental health, it almost felt like I could tell that like chemicals were not right in my brain, where I was like, why don't I have that like get up and go and that like drive that I typically have, that motivation, like all of that. And so I was just trying different things. And of course, Huberman's podcast now shares a lot about neurotransmitters. And I hadn't gotten into that part. I'd really done a lot for my gut and hormones. So I started implementing some of the stuff he shared, and ice bath was one of them. And so I definitely noticed the difference. So I just share what works for me in that regards. But I am not a neurotransmitter expert, so put a disclaimer there.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool. It's cool to like experiment with stuff and see, hey, you tried this thing and now all of a sudden it's been like huge for you, you know? And I
Yeah.
think with the ice bath stuff, as much as it's kind of like a hype, I do think there's a time and place for it, you know, for the right
Yeah, some
reasons.
people
But
may not work well, some people may work well, but also kind of like we've talked about too, it's like you have to understand how to apply it. If there's things to think about, and it's almost like, again, like how does it fit into the strategy of what I'm trying to do? I think some people who just maybe hear, oh, fitness, health, I'll just do an ice bath, and it's kind of random, they may not get the full benefit or understanding of it. But saunas is something that I'm starting to get more into. I'm definitely a person where I'm just like, I got to understand some of the science of it and the benefits of it, because I don't want to do something just to do something. Like, how does it work and why, and how can I fit it into my like, game plan and my strategy? So sauna is something that that I'm learning more about now. And I don't know where you're from or where you've lived. Saunas, ice baths, are they a big thing?
I mean, like, so saunas in Finland, like saunas are huge. And over here, so I live in Norway, like I said, in the north, which by the way, if you guys visit, we got to do this, but there's a sauna like in the harbor. So like you have the best view, like you sit in the sauna and then you jump in the fjord. It's fucking, like, especially wintertime, it's fucking freezing. But I love doing that. I haven't been for a minute now.
Yeah.
I will say that, but it's great. Like, especially afterwards, like you feel amazing, you know? I usually have a harder time with the sauna though than the cold water. Like the cold
Me
I can
too.
deal with the sauna, I'm like, fuck, get me out of here. Like after 5 minutes, you know?
Oh, I'm the same. I am like struggling to breathe in the ice bath. I feel good in, but the sauna, man, I struggle.
Let's do that. Let's make that happen when you guys visit to go hiking and stuff.
Sounds good.
Cool.
I'm in.
Awesome. Before we forget, I was going to forget. Before we forget, Jenny, where can people find you? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Jenny the Nutritionist. And then my program is called Create Your Shape. And you can go to the site to learn more. at jennythenutritionist.com/create-your-shape. And then lastly, I have a podcast as well, and it is called Create Your Shape with Jenny the Nutritionist. So those are all of the ways to engage and connect.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link that in the show notes. Jenny, thanks for coming on. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'll make sure to put this up on Monday the 11th. To our listener, make sure to share this episode if you loved it. Share it in your stories. Drop us a quick rating and or review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. And then we will talk to you very soon.